Thank you very much. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic and I'm over 9 years sober. Thank you for having me here. It's good to see some people I recognize, to see some people I don't. For those of you who are maybe here at this meeting for the first time, and certainly for those of you who are not in London, the after 8 meetings and the after 9 meetings in London have got a very long history. And of course, there's the after 8 mint, and that's what the joke is. So the after 8 meeting, it would be held at 8 p.m. at Eaton Square, um, and it was at 8 o'clock. So that's the second element of the joke. And the third element is it's for people who are over 8 years sober. But anyone can come, and at the beginning they'd go around and everyone would say how long they're sober. And if it was more than 8 years, you'd say after 8 or over 8. And the after 9 was the same thing, started a couple of years later on a Saturday evening, also at Eaton Square, but downstairs. Um, and of course, COVID drove a Sherman tank through lots of groups, and so lots of things have changed. But in my first 8 years, I would go to the after 8 meeting, not every week, but very, very often. And, you know, you'd say, well, I'm sort of 2 months sober, 4 months, 3 years sober, 5 years sober, 7 years and 11 months sober. And then finally you say, I'm over 8. And of course, no one notices, no one cares. And you think at 8 years that something very special and significant has been achieved. And you think you're going to join the UN Security Council or be made a Supreme Court judge or something. Of course, no, you're just an alcoholic. And I've been to the after 9 meeting years ago. My date of sobriety is 24th of July 1993, so I'm just coming up to 31 years. I was 21 when I got sober. I've been to the after 9 I've been to the after 9 meeting a few times over the years, and many years ago, I've always been intrigued by this question of issues of later sobriety. And one chap who was having a very hard time, donkeys years ago, having a very hard time. Um, and people echoed with similar stories, and the issue of later sobriety, which was of uh, being discussed that evening, was when you've bought your little house in France many years sober, how do you handle walking past all the vineyards knowing you can't drink any of the wine? That seemed to be the issue of later sobriety. So it turns out the issue of later sobriety is pretty much the same as the issue of early sobriety, which is don't have the drink. My alcoholism is not mysterious. It's very straightforward. The only explanation for why I drank such prodigious quantities is the explanation written by Dr. Silkworth in 1939, which held true for his patients and holds true for me, which is I drink the amount I drink when I drink because I'm built like it. That's all. It's not because of emotions, not because of childhood, not because of trauma, not because of anything other. That's simply how I'm built. Because it's how I'm built, there is nothing I can do about it. I'm stuck like it. If I were to start again, I'd be back on the Formula One track, round and round and round and round and round. An acquaintance of mine who is funnily enough, also a chief physician like Dr. Silkworth, but of the largest alcoholism and addiction hospital in a particular region in Germany. We were discussing the doctor's opinion. He said that the precise scientific explanation may be somewhat different. The terminology is somewhat different, but essentially it's the same thing. He said, you should never drink again. Now, that's not the real crux of the problem. Because that knowledge should be sufficient for me not to have another drink, except my first attempt to give up alcohol entirely, based on a profound need to give up alcohol entirely because of what it was doing to me in the late 80s, was in 1990. Now, I think I may have said the wrong date. 1993, not 24th of July 1993. It was 3 years. 3 years between first giving up alcohol and having my last drink. Um, I already knew that my drinking was catastrophic. I shouldn't do it. It took those 3 years to learn that that knowledge alone and plenty of willpower are insufficient to keep me from having that first drink. That is the crux of my alcoholism. And I tried for a long time to stay sober simply by going to meetings. It was the January 1993. I first came to AA. I was in a different country for much of that year. I was supposed to be there for a long time, but I had to come back because I couldn't stay sober. It was a city of 5 million people with one group, and the group was a mess. This was early 90s on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Um, the country hadn't recovered from the trauma of the end of communism, and it was just a mess in so many ways. And almost no one was sober. No one was sober long term. There was no sponsorship. It was just basically a group of people clinging as if to a rock. So I came back and I got back to London thinking if I do 3 meetings a day, I'll be fine. And I went to 3 meetings a day and I wasn't fine. I kept periodically drinking. And I kept calling it a relapse. And of course, unless one's recovered, one isn't relapsing, one's simply continuing to drink because the condition hasn't been treated. Unless one knows where one is, the directions to get out of there won't work. I needed to understand I hadn't begun the process of recovery. And what I mean by that is I'm working with I've got a bunch of sponsees as usual. And I've got a number of people on step one. All of the ones I've got on step one are people who've been in AA for years, and know a lot and have been through the steps and blah blah blah. But it's amazing. There's this particular point which is always missed as we're going through the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. There's a line. I think it's in the doctor's opinion where it says he could stay sober provided he followed a few simple rules. And that idea, a certain simple attitude, is used elsewhere. I think it's around 26 or 27. And the question to the sponsee is, this was the question given to me. What are the few simple rules? What is the simple attitude? And of course, people are well trained. They go to meetings and do the steps and help other people. But upstream of that, for me, there had to be a fundamental recognition that I am an utter liability to myself. I cannot be trusted with my life. I cannot be trusted with my day. Because if I were to drink, it would happen on a day. The day is the problem. My life is not the problem. The problem is the day. The last day I had to drink, 24th of July, 1993. Get up in the morning. I went to a morning meeting. I went to the London Lighthouse meeting, if anyone remembers that, in Notting Hill. And I left the meeting and went to the pub and had a drink and went to the off license and bought a bottle of, shame to say, Cinzano, drank it, glugged it down as though it was fizzy pop, threw myself in front of a car, caused an accident, ambulance called. They determined I was drunk, not injured. I was arrested, thrown in the cells. Um, Policeman. Um, he asked my address and I told him, and he said, with an accent like that, he said, and he said, why are you doing this to yourself? What's wrong? There's something that doesn't add up here. And I said, with tears of crocodile sincerity dripping down my sick-covered cheeks, AA didn't work. I was doing a great deal of what AA was asking me to do. And I was doing it to some extent more diligently and with a greater sense of desperation than many of the people around me. But I hadn't surrendered. I hadn't given up. I hadn't dethroned myself as the emperor of my life. I hadn't. There's a character, the king in one of the Lord of the Rings books, who has a counselor who gives him advice, except the counselor is in the pay of someone who is very evil and is giving him very bad advice. And he's totally in the thrall of this wicked counselor. And I was in the thrall of a wicked counselor when I was drinking. And that counselor was me. If I was faced with a situation, I'd say, Tim, what do you think we should do about this? And I would tell myself. Then I'd say, well, it's me telling myself. I wouldn't give myself bad advice. Who'd do that? If I thought it, it was true. If I saw it, it was there. If I heard it, you said it. If I thought you thought something, you must have thought it. Why? Because I thought you'd thought it. Whatever occurred to me was true by virtue of it having occurred to me. In my perception of my own life, I was in I was as infallible as a pope, except my life was a catastrophe. But that wasn't my fault. It was you, it was them, it was the way my brain was wired, it was my family history, which is tragic, and concentration camps and whatever else. It was that. It was my star sign when I was 11. I remember thinking if I have children, I'll make sure they're not a Virgo, because clearly the problem is that I'm a Virgo. 11, I was thinking. The problem was never the advice I was giving myself. That's fine. It was the world. It was things which were beyond my control, which were the problem. What happened in that July and increasingly into the August was I recognized that the problem was not the world, the problem was not the past, the problem was not my brain wiring, the problem was not the events that had happened. The problem was none of those things. The problem was that I was not to be trusted, because that morning when I drank, I thought I was going to stay sober for the whole of that day, but I didn't. I was drunk by lunchtime. I was in the cells, or I was released in the evening. I went to a meeting that evening. I was not to be trusted. Now, the thing is, you have to get through the day. If you can't trust yourself, what can you trust? Now, AA has this disastrous notion, apparently disastrous to a newcomer, of a higher power. Oh, great. So I can't trust myself, and you're now asking me to trust something I have no conscious contact with, have never seen, have never heard, and have trouble believing in, and have all sorts of other problems with, because I have problems with authority figures generally, parents, teachers, bosses, God. And you're saying my answer is that. Now, for people that believe in God already when they start off the process, well, you have some transfer credits. But if one doesn't, and frankly, even if one doesn't have direct access to knowledge of God's will by any stretch of the imagination for a host of reasons, which I won't um, go into. What there is available is people in AA. And what struck me by some of the people in the meetings that I went to in my first few months is how cheerful a lot of them were. Not universally. Cheerful, competent, unruffled, difficult to ruffle. I would throw everything, all of my manipulative skills. They had no effect. And the marvelous thing about AA members, in contrast to the professionals I was plonked in front of a number of times as I was growing up, is people in AA didn't have to maintain or retain a, a professional demeanor. They could tell it like it was and walk out of the room. I remember sitting down next to New Zealand Colin, if anyone remembers him, in the Servite Hall in Fulham. And I sat down next to him. I was in my first year, towards the end of my first year. I was trying to catch up on my life and get some studying completed. And he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I can't wait till my course is over." He said, "Wishing your life away, are you?" And he walked off. A professional would not have the gall to say that. Very good. And you know those films where someone is landed on a foreign planet, an alien planet, and the first thing they say is, "Take me to your leader." And I was a bit like that in AA. I had very few virtues when I got sober. One of them was I had the ability to suss out in a room who had the information, who had the experience, and just like knock over chairs, push everyone else out of the way and say, "I need your help. Will you help me?" And people in AA would. So I had a good clutch of people who were 25, 30 years sober, and I cannot tell you how helpful it was to have such people in my corner. Now, they didn't give me much time because they were very brisk, very businesslike. They saw through the BS very quickly. They nailed it. They had me. They had me treed. With one comment, they would have me treed. Where other people, they'd have to dance around me for an hour to get to the truth. I remember uh, Claire will be bored by this story, but I remember when I was very new, phoning up a woman called Angry Sue, who was 30 years sober at the time, saying, "Sue, Sue, I want to drink." And she said, "AA's for people that don't want to drink." And she put the phone down. And I phoned back and said, "Sue, I actually don't want to drink, but I'm scared I'm going to." She said, "Now we can have a conversation." And what happened then was it became clear a division took place within me between the real me and all of the bad counsel, which came to me in my own voice, which I'd been listening to. I recognized that the enemy within was not me. It was a set of beliefs which had a voice, a set of thinking patterns, but it wasn't me. I needed to pick a side. Whose side was I on? Was I on the side of me, or was I on the side of my ego, my current sponsor, who I refer to as my current sponsor to keep him on his toes? My current sponsor says, "Your ego, buddy, is not your amigo." Um, and I started to realize what I was up against. I started to pick the side of sanity within me, of which I had but a last shred, but I did have a last shred of sanity, and I held on to it. Um, I'm going to skip ahead because it is a topic here, the issues of later sobriety. Uh, if you've been in AA for a long time, it will not have escaped your notice that being sober for 20 years or 30 years does not guarantee a lifetime of sobriety beyond that point. Having recovered does not preclude the possibility of relapse. Because one is sane right now does not mean insanity can't return. And because of the nature of the physical craving, were it to return, were I to have the first drink, I would almost certainly not come back. It's very difficult. I've seen very difficult cases, very distressing cases of people sober a very long time who can't come back, or if they come back, they're not quite the same. And that's almost more frightening. The person that they were is just gone. Something else has come back. It's almost like an Edgar Allan Poe story. Terrifying. So my job today is still don't have a drink. But the point about being powerless over alcohol is not having a drink today is not something I can do purely as an act of the will. The ability not to have the first drink, the restoration to sanity, requires me to fulfill certain other conditions. And I think this is a useful rule of thumb. There are 7 points, it can be argued, in the big book where it says, if you do this bad thing, you're certain to drink. It doesn't say when, it says you're certain to drink. There are other things which, if you don't do them, you're certain to drink. It doesn't say when, but if it's not arrested, if it's not dealt with, you'll drink. I sponsored a lot of people over the years, and in particular, a lot of people who've been around a long time and have come back. It's part of the description of being sober a long time is you tend to get people like that as responsees. And every single time we go through that list, and every single time the person that slipped after many years or found themselves in the most profound trouble after many years fell foul of at least 4 of those 7 ideas, sometimes referred to not over dramatically as death threats. The first one is resentment, which I think I would define, of course, there's nothing wrong with having a full range of emotions. And as someone told me once, if something happens and you're angry and you're able to feel it, let it pass through you, it's gone in 30 seconds. The problem is my retention of anger and my fostering and conversion of it into a whole grievance mechanism which shifts the responsibility for things going on away from me onto you. Resentment. The second one is secrets. The best way, this is a great tip someone gave me. He said the best way not to have any secrets is not to do anything you need to keep secret. Which has meant that I've had to look at problems in areas other than alcohol, compulsive behaviors, compulsive activities. I find the AA program entirely sufficient for dealing with those. Other people have different experiences. That's fine. The third thing is behavior which harms other people. I can't get away with it. The fourth one and the fifth one are related. Fourth one is about not facing creditors. One doesn't have to have paid them off in 5 minutes, but to face them, come to arrangements with them, and making thanks, Gordon, and making the amends, and to complete the amends, to do my utmost to straighten out the past means there is no one left on my list that I haven't done my utmost to make amends to. And the last 2 is work and self-sacrifice for others, chiefly through sponsorship and service. So that's the most important thing in my life. I have a job, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is making myself available to God to work through me. And then the last one is the resting on the laurels, the complacency. So I do keep on top of things on a daily basis with inventory. But once a quarter, I do a solid 360-degree inventory of my whole life. It takes a couple of hours because there isn't much crap in there, but I deal with it and I share it with a sponsor, I share it with a friend, and I share it with a priest. That's what I happen to do. My life couldn't be better. There is nothing, I have no major problems, frankly. I have very few small problems. Things may not look ideal to other people, but I'm comfortable, very comfortable with the way my life is. There are lots of things which are difficult and challenging, but that's a different question. All I've had to do to stay sober the last year is precisely what I had to do to stay sober in the first year, which was precisely what the big book tells me to do. I think one can't go wrong with that. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing what the rest of you have to share.